Hello and welcome to the Ramblings of a 42-Year-Old Man. Chris Smith here with you today, and we are going to do hopefully a fun little ramble, definitely fun for me, about a very specific time and a very specific thing. So we're going to talk about music from early to mid-90s action films. We're going to talk about some of the composers, we're going to talk about the movies, and I don't know why we think that this was such a time for music that actually, on these movies that you wouldn't necessarily think would have a whole lot to them. Why they have such good musical scores? I don't know. But we're going to dig into to different composers of the era. There will be some talk about some of the really, really giant legacy composers who was also doing really good music in this time. But we're going to focus really on these kind of what today would be considered like B-list action movies that have these amazing scores in them. So stay tuned for that. We'll start kind of with some early 90s stuff. We'll look back into some of the 70s and 80s as well, but we're going to dig into just some crazy 90s action and look at the music of those. So anybody who saw my Speed ramble the other day, I mentioned talking about the music of that and how it kind of made me remember just all the awesome music that we had from these action movies in the 90s, and it made me want to put this together. And so I started going through some of the movies of the 90s, the music that I remember so much about them, and the composers. And what I ended up finding out is a lot of these composers, the same composers will do a lot of these movies that really stood out to me in this time period. So I'm just going to kind of, starting with the early 90s, we're going to go forward. We're going to list some movies, list the composers, list other movies that they've worked on that I think have some great scores. And we're going to go pretty much from anywhere between 90, 91 to all the way up to 99. I think I have some. But there's this real fun heyday in the early to mid 90s of just these cool action movies with really great music. And so we're going to jump into that. So I'm going to start off with 1992's Last of the Mohicans. So this one I would not consider B-list action. This is almost more period drama with really, great action in it. It is a Michael Mann film, a wonderful movie. But the music is insanely good. And this was a collaborative with Trevor Jones and Randy Edelman. And, while I would definitely not put this movie in the same bucket as the Speeds and The Rock and the movies I'm going to talk about in a little bit, this for me, was the first, when I was looking through the 90s movies, I'm like, this is a movie whose music I can hum in my head right now without even blinking. So, I mean, the music of this was just amazing. Now, Trevor Jones, he would go on to do music in Cliffhanger with Sylvester Stallone. Now, he had movies back in the 80s as well, including Excalibur from 81 and Labyrinth from 1986. So he has a pretty varied musical film career. And for those movies as well, I wouldn't consider Cliffhanger, okay, I consider Cliffhanger kind of that B-list action movie that nowadays we consider B-list, but in the 90s it was like must-see action movie, But I can think of the music for all those films really easily as well. Now, Randy Edelman, he's probably best known for Dragonheart, another 90s movie, 1996, that came out. There's a song in there a piece of score in there called, I think it's Look to the Stars or Journey to the Stars. It has been in multiple, movie theater trailers over the years. If you ever heard like a little part of the song, you would recognize it. Maybe not from Dragonheart, but from any sort of trailer, like probably 10 to 15 different trailers have used this piece of music. And the main theme of it itself is really great too. He also did Gettysburg in 1993. So again, not your standard like B-list action like I'm talking about with his music, but again, I can think of that Gettysburg theme, and I know the theme of that movie more than I remember the movie itself. So that's why kind of Last Mohicans gets me started on this kind of 90s train I'm on. So continuing through the 90s, we now get to Speed, which I just talked about the other day. So Mark Mancina, he did Speed. He also did Bad Boys, Will Smith, Martin Lawrence in 1995. He did Twister in 1996 with Bill Paxton. And just, I can think of music from both those movies pretty easily. He's done the scores for Bad Boys going forward as well. Now, I mentioned he's part of the Hans Zimmer kind of film score compilation that they have. And, you'll hear Hans Zimmer's name pop up here in just a little bit as well. There's a whole group of musicians that I've kind of learned under Hans Zimmer, and, people from like the composer for Game of Thrones and Iron Man. He came out of that crew. You'll just see all sorts of people come in there. But, like I mentioned, Speed, watching this movie the other day, and the opening credits and the music kicks in. I'm like, okay, this was a time of really cool music in these action movies I want to talk about. So that's what kind of got me on this kick. We'll jump into 1994 next, and we've got Stargate. Now, Stargate, again, I wouldn't necessarily consider B-list action. It's kind of B-list sci-fi, though. You know, you think of Stargate, you're not thinking like your really classic sci-fi movies. It's definitely more B-list. But you got Kurt Russell in there, James Spader. It's a really, really fun movie to watch, and I remember the music to it pretty well. I think arguably David Arnold's biggest and most famous work is from Independence Day in 1996, though. I remember I had the album for this. I was in high school, and I had the score on CD, and I would play it all the time. The music for that was just really, really awesome. So that's David Arnold. We'll jump into 1995 now with Crimson Tide. Now, Crimson Tide is a Hans Zimmer project. We mentioned him earlier. Now, Hans Zimmer, he has done scores for, I think, even more. I love Crimson Tide, but my favorite of his is The Rock by Michael Bay with Sean Connery and Nicolas Cage. The music for The Rock is pretty awesome. Music for Broken Arrow, pretty awesome as well, although I think Broken Arrow's music might be most famous because there's a theme in there that's been pulled for Scream, and it is Dewey's theme from Scream. So this little random drop from Broken Arrow is in most of the Scream movies, so I think it's more famous for that now than anything else. But you know, Hans Zimmer, I don't have it listed as my action score, but he is probably most well known for doing the score of The Lion King. So again, Lion King is mostly known for the music, but the score itself is done by Hans Zimmer, and he does an amazing job, of course, with it. All right, so jumping into 1996, this was a big year, but I'm going to start with Executive Decision by, of all people, Jerry Goldsmith. So Executive Decision was kind of this B-list action movie with Kurt Russell and Steven Seagal. And I remember watching the trailers and being like, oh, wow, it's going to be like this buddy team-up with Seagal and Kurt Russell. That's so cool. Spoilers for an almost 30-year-old movie here real quick. Steven Seagal dies, like, 15 minutes in the movie. And then it's totally a Kurt Russell movie. And Kurt Russell, at this point, you know, he was kind of... He's past his Big Trouble in Little China days. He hasn't quite hit the, like, what else did he kind of blow up in later? Like, what's the movie? I can't think of it right now. But anyway, he's not really known as an action star at this moment. You know, he's been mostly in comedies and family kind of movies at this point. So when you see, like, Steven Seagal and Kurt Russell, you're like, oh, Steven Seagal's going to be the action guy, and Kurt Russell would be kind of like the analytical guy that's helping him out. No, Steven Seagal's dead, and now it's all on Kurt Russell's shoulders to figure out the rest of this movie. But the music itself to this is amazing, and it is done by Jerry Goldsmith, as I said, who is a huge name when it comes to music. He is known for all of the Star Trek TV shows and movies. He's did the music for Gremlins back in 1984. King Solomon's Mines, one of my favorite really, really campy action movies in the 80s. He did the music for Alien back in 1979. 90s input from Jerry Goldsmith. So Deep Rising, another really kind of campy horror sci-fi kind of movie I love. He did that, which has a really fun score. He did The Mummy in 1999, which is pretty well known. Brendan Fraser, the music for that, which I can think of many cues from that movie that I remember to this day. First Night from 1995 with Sean Connery and Richard Gere has a beautiful score. If anybody ever has a chance to listen to that, there's really some pretty stuff in there. I mean, Jerry Goldsmith is classic for a reason. But 1996 is going to continue with another classic score composer. So the film Eraser, an Arnold Schwarzenegger, Vanessa Williams action jaunt in 1996, is scored by Alan Silvestri, who is most famous for Back to the Future, actually, back in 1985. He's did all three Back to the Future movies. He also did James Cameron's The Abyss, which has, again, gorgeous music. That was in 1989. And then he also did The Predator, the music from Arnold Schwarzenegger's Predator movie back in 1987, which has a very, very hummable theme as well. Some good drum beats and stuff in that one. But again, kind of, you look at Eraser and you're thinking, wow, this is, you know, your mid-90s, like I keep saying B-level, but really, you know, these are movies that if they came out today would I mean, you think of John Wick and how at least, you know, we were finally getting some of this back, but this was even more B-list than John Wick. And you got Alan Silvestri, the guy who did the music of Back to the Future, is scoring this. It's like, what the heck's going on in the mid-90s? But you were getting some great music from it, that's for sure. We already mentioned, you know, Independence Day with David Arnold in 1996, Twister with Mark Mancina. That was just a year of some really cool, you know, action scores. So 1996, really great year. So as we start getting into the later 90s, it's less about these fun, you know, early 90s, late 80s B-level action movies, and it's getting into a little more prestige stuff. Now, I wouldn't necessarily call this one prestigious, but this is definitely sci-fi, and I remember loving this as a kid, and this, as a 17-year-old high schooler, this is Starship Troopers. And it is a... Paul Verhoeven movie with Casper Van Dien and Denise Richards, Neil Patrick Harris. I mean, you want to talk about a funny cast, but I love this movie, and I love the music, and the music is done by Basil Poledouris, who, again, you want to talk about a giant in the field. This guy did the music for the Conan movies back in the 80s. He also did RoboCop. He did music for The Hunt for Red October back in 1990. I mean, this guy has some great scores on his discography, and I love Starship Troopers. This definitely is a satire. There's a march theme in here that's definitely played as a satire, but then it kicks in this really beautiful, broad, like fantastic theme that is made for like a Lord of the Rings style movie, and it's for this silly little satirical sci-fi movie. It is great. But also 1997, Man in Black. So we're talking about now sci-fi comedy. Will Smith, Tommy Lee Jones, Danny Elfman does the score. Now we want to talk about giant in the field. So Danny Elfman would be Batman 1989, Beetlejuice 1988, Spider-Man in the 2000s. I mean, he has done so many things. I mean, if you think of a Tim Burton movie, Danny Elfman has probably done the score for it. Same thing with Sam Raimi as well. So this was a big one, Men in Black. Again, not looking to be a little action at this point. As we're getting into the late 90s, we're getting a little more variety. You want to talk about variety? How about best film Oscar winner, Titanic in 1997, with an absolutely amazing score by James Horner. Now, James Horner is another giant in the field. He has, let's just look at 90s. 1991, he did The Rocketeer. 1995, Braveheart. 1995 also, same year as Braveheart, he had Apollo 13. I mean, what the heck? Mask of Zorro, 1988. I'll admit that I'm a little partial to that. Mask of Zorro is one of my favorite movies of all time. It'll definitely be on a movie I love, Ramble, at some point. But the music to that, absolutely love it. And that's not even talking about James Horner's 80s output. Commando, another Arnold Schwarzenegger action. You want to talk about fun action movies that have a really great music? There's one. Aliens, American Tail, Willow, Field of Dreams. I mean, this guy was throwing out just amazing score after amazing score after amazing score for 20 plus years. Of course, he was a Oscar winner for Titanic. I believe he was an Oscar winner for Braveheart as well. So, probably even Apollo 13. I have to go into that. I haven't checked that out yet, but that one's really good. And then we'll kind of get into very, very late 90s with probably the biggest giant when it comes to film scores. Just a second. So any ramble that I'm going to have about music from movies in general, even though this one was kind of specifically trying to be about action films, I can never leave off the man, John Williams. 1999 saw episode 1 of Star Wars released, The Phantom Menace, and even though a lot of the music is recycled from previous Star Wars work, he's got Duel of the Fates was a brand new one. Anakin's theme was in there. He's got a ton of new music that he's created for that is considered classic, as most of his stuff is, honestly. He still had some great 90s input as well. Jurassic Park, 1993, not only one of the best movies, but one of the best music that almost most people would be able to recognize very easily. Home Alone, he did the themes for Home Alone. And so that's just 90s input. Obviously, he's still going in the 2000s. I mean, he's at Harry Potter. You talk to my kids, they're going to know him most from Harry Potter. If you talk to me, I'm going to know him most as the 70s. Star Wars, Jaws, Superman, jumping into the 80s. You got Raiders of the Lost Ark, E.T. I mean, anything Steven Spielberg has done. You want to talk about just giant in the field. But so, yeah, my fun little music thing that kind of started with these crazy little action movies has gone to the giant of the music field with John Williams. But that's just where my head went as I was doing research into these movies. And so from early 90s all the way up to 99, just amazing music. Anybody who loves scores or classical music of any nature, look for some of these scores for some of these movies. There is just amazing stuff in there. I might actually, in the description field of this, try to put a list here, so if people don't have the chance to kind of go back to try to get names and stuff. But there's just amazing stuff in there. I mean, I would say favorites: Speed, The Rock, Independence Day, Starship Troopers, obviously Titanic. I mean, I think most people know that one as well. But give those a listen. There's some really, really, really good stuff out there. Anybody who enjoys that kind of music. But thank you all for listening to me ramble. I know I went on quite a bit about this, but just really fun thing I uncovered while watching Speed the other day. Who knew that it would lead into this huge ramble about music? But hope anybody who's interested gives some of those movies a listen to, or maybe rewatches some of them. The movies themselves are all pretty good too. I don't think there's a single one of those movies that I wouldn't recommend somebody watch, not just for the music, but for the movie itself. So I'm sure we'll have some Movies I Love editions on some of those coming up. I'll have a Mask of Zorro one pretty soon. But thank you all for listening as always and watching, and I will talk again soon. Thank you.